The PD amounts, once I hit a certain point, never really changed. Like I said, it was that 1,000 milligrams a test with the 3 to 500 milligrams of anabolic a week, and then growth hormone on top of that. Now, I also started experimenting with some fast-acting insulins because I was noticing that I wasn't absorbing my food. GH makes you very insulin resistant, and I'm already one of the when you have a fast metabolism and you don't really add fat very easily. Usually, you're an under insulin secretor. People who are over insulin secretors grow well, but they get fat easily, right? People who don't under secrete, insulin usually stay leaner, but have trouble putting size on. So once I added growth hormone into the equation, you would think I'd start growing better, but then when I became more insulin resistant, or at least my insulin couldn't work the way it needed to. So I started experimenting with insulin. The only thing available at the time was Humulin R, which is like Novolin R. It's like a medium fast-acting insulin. And I started growing from that. Then this was probably during the 95, season, leading up to my junior nationals. And I started growing really, really well on that. That's when I also first got introduced to IGF-1, which was new to the market. No one had seen it, heard of it. We had read about it in Bill Phillips' anabolic reference guide that he had out in, I think, the 94 edition. But no one had seen it. And I had finally had access to some German guys that got it. I told the story before. I put 20 pounds on in 20 days taking that stuff. That was like a game changer. Why the IGF-1 today doesn't work the way that one did. That one came from actually Australia, from your neck of the woods, Adelaide, Australia, I remember. And I don't know why the IGF-1 that's out there now is not as effective, but it worked really well on me. And that was the only thing I really added. The insulin and the IGF-1 kind of kicked everything into high gear. I actually eventually stopped taking insulin because what I did was I hit a certain weight. The heaviest I got was like 320, 319. And I didn't want to go over that anymore. I didn't want to get that heavy anymore because I felt like literally when I would wake up in the morning, I couldn't wait to go for the day to be over so I can go back to sleep. That's how tired I was carrying that weight around. And I was breaking shit too. Like I'd sit down on like beach chair and I'd lean back and it would just snap, and you don't even realize how heavy you are. I was just literally breaking crap. So I decided, it's probably not a good idea to keep your body weight over 300 pounds on a regular basis. So I kind of, probably the last half of my career, I was keeping my body about 290, in the off season. And because I was competing at like 270, 268, so I didn't really need to be 320 anymore. It wasn't going to help me anymore. And my frame really couldn't hold any more muscle. So it was like, at that point, it was, I kind of cut back a little bit. And so when I did that, I stopped taking the insulin because I thought insulin was maybe bloating my stomach. But that's also around the time that I discovered FIBRE. Remember, in the 90s and early 2000s, no one knew anything about gut health. Gut health was not talked about. I had just discovered essential fatty acids and was bringing that to the marketplace and explaining to people why they were needed. So I didn't know anything about gut health either. I was consuming 12 meals a day and I was eating no fiber in my diet. And you start retaining all this food, even though you're pooping 3 times a day, you should be pooping 10 times a day with the amount of food you're eating, right? That's when I first discovered fiber. And I hadn't even discovered probiotics or anything. And like I said, I didn't know anything about gut health. I just started saying, hey, this fiber stuff is working. And then I started doing more research. And obviously, now my best-selling, product from Species Nutrition is FiberLize. Everyone uses it. But no one knew about that. And I think that's why there was a lot more abdominal distension and people had a lot more gut problems back then because we just didn't know that there was gut health. We didn't know about the probiotic bacteria protecting the internal lining of the small intestine and the large intestine, and that you got to feed these gut bacteria, and that the gut bacteria basically ferment soluble fiber, and that soluble, fiber coming from like a potent fiber source like psyllium helps, move waste through the colon faster. It trains the colon to be stronger. And, so all these things I learned over the years by trial and error on myself. And as I learned stuff, I just kept revealing it to people. And I remember when I first was thinking about coming out with a fiber supplement, I was talking to Steve Bleckman from Muscular Development, who, I was writing that column, The Anabolic Free for. He's like, he goes, no one will buy a fiber supplement. I said, Steve, but people don't know you need this stuff. No one takes this. He's like, you're just feeding the bugs. That's what he used to call it. Feeding the bugs. That was the bacteria. I said, yeah, but isn't that good? He didn't know anything about gut bacteria, but he's like, nah, you're just feeding the bugs. I see, but those are good bugs though. You want to feed those. because that's protecting the lining. Think about all the bodybuilders that have like leaky gut syndrome and all these, digestive issues. It's all because the gut bacteria are weak. So I didn't listen to him, of course. I wound up getting fired from working with him, with John Romano. We started RX Muscle. I launched Fibrelize, and the rest is history. And so it took me 10 years to get people to understand how important the gut bacteria health was, how important it is to take a daily fiber supplement at least 2 times a day. And now everyone does it as a standard practice, just like everyone takes essential fatty acids as a standard practice. It's funny. I was looking at my Species Nutrition products at what the most popular selling supplements are, and it's FIBRE and Omega-Lyze, which is Omega-Lyze is our essential fatty acid supplement. So the two things that I kind of brought to the bodybuilding, marketplace became my best 2 selling supplements, because everyone started realizing how imperative it was to their bodybuilding success. There's no cure for this.